And if I may just briefly explain the events which happened on 30th January. So all of us are aware of one of the greatest of our rulers is Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj. So in the late 17th century, Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj laid down his vision for Swaraj. So when he was coronated in 1674, a lot of administrative measures far in advance of his times were implemented. A lot of these are also based on an ancient political ethos. Now, after Maharaj passed away, several rulers and leaders of the Maratha Empire carried forward this vision. Chhatrapati Sambhaji Maharaj. Then by the mid-18th century, we also had the Maratha Empire expanding across a majority of the subcontinent under the Peshwas, or the prime ministers who became the de facto rulers of the empire. Now, one of the great Peshwas was a Peshwa called Thorle Madhavrao. Now, Thorle Madhavrao passed away in 1772, and he was succeeded by his son and brother, Peshwa Narayan Rao. Now, Narayan Rao was murdered by his uncle, that's Peshwa Raghunath Rao or Raghoba. Now, a group of people at that point of time, led by Nana Fadnis, who was a great statesman. He, as his name suggests, he was in charge of the Fadnishi, or the finance and accounts. So Nana Fadnis led this group of people into a revolution which overthrew Peshwa Raghunath Rao. Now, the unique feature of this revolution was that there was a governing council, okay, which was made up of 11 elected and 1 nominated member. So this is called a Bar Bhai. And going ahead, as the decades progressed, this also became popularly called as Sarkar of the Karbharis, or the Karbhari Sarkar. Now, this in essence, okay, gives, I would say, in many ways was culmination of those ancient roots from Vaishali, the Chola Ur and Sabha, all the ancient, the Hindu and the Sanatan traditions of representative form of government on a grand national scale, which was actually put forward by this particular Karbhari Sarkar. Now, there are several such, I would say, documented agreements on judiciary civil relations, on military civil separation, which define this basically government. Details are there in my book, The First Republic. But in summary, if I may define this republic, this was the most complete form of a Dharmic Bharat Ganrajya which you can actually find. So a lot of the criticism which the Western inspired intelligence used to be saying that we have no historical precedent of a pan-Indian Dharmic representative government or Dharmic Ganrajya is countered by celebrating this day. So by celebrating this day, so on 30th January, so just to give a brief history, this revolution officially declared the Barbhai government in Purandar, which was near Pune, around mid-January, January 17th as per some historians. And on January 30th, Pune, which was the capital of the Maratha Empire, was conquered by these revolutionaries and was officially declared that the Peshwa's government was overthrown and we are in charge of the government. And that's why 30th January becomes very important for us. And this form of government going ahead spread across the subcontinent and so was made relevant for a large part of the Indian landmass. So just to conclude, by celebrating this day, we are also in a way paying our tribute to all the ancient Indian democratic experiments, whether they be the Vedic Ganrajya, whether they be the Mahajanapada period Ganapadas, or they be the different representative institutions in the Gupta or a Chola Empire, finally culminating into, let's say, the Karbhari Sarkar, which is part of the Maratha Empire. So we are actually paying tribute to this alternative Indic vision of a civilizational state. And there are lessons which we can learn from all these different governments in helping us at least think on where do we want to go ahead, as a nation and, basically as a governing structure itself. Thank you.
Wonderful, Venkatesh ji. Jab tak Nana, tab tak Puna was what I remember while reading on the Maratha history very succinctly on Nana Fadnavis. It's been a very instrumental thing. You brought forth the significance, how it has influenced overall governance, and also you try to debunk and decolonize the whole Western construct. Aneesh ji, I would like to check with you about, learn from you about what are the lessons and influences the Maratha Empire had on influences on the modern India.
Yes, very good evening. And first of all, many thanks for inviting me to this discussion. I have read Mr. Venkatesh's book, and it's really good. I mean, you get a very good idea of what the situation was like and why those people took those decisions, and how it, was really a high water mark of Indian history in the 18th century. So, uh, when you look at the Maratha Empire, you look right from Chhatrapati Shivaji right up to the end of the Maratha Empire in 1818, and we need to see what their whole worldview was regarding the Indian subcontinent. So lessons can draw from them. They were one of the very few powers to have an all India presence, few Indic powers to have an all India presence. If we go prior to the Marathas, then we have to go all the way back to the Gurjara Pratiharas, way long back in history. After that, we have been under, large parts of the country were under the rule of various other invaders. And what is interesting is that even after that long passage of time, so you had, the various invaders ruling large parts of North India, South India. But even then, in the 18th century, you find that the Marathas had a vision which was all encompassing, that they thought of the Indus river, Sindhu Nadi as a border. Uh, if you can share that photo which I had sent you on WhatsApp earlier. Right. So this is actually a letter in. It's this letter is a Marathi, and it was written by Govind Rao Kale in 1793. In 1793, he's written this letter. He was a diplomat in the court of the Nizam of Hyderabad, a Maratha diplomat in the court of the Nizam of Hyderabad, and he says that this is our realm, right from the river Indus to the southern ocean is our realm, and this is the realm of the Hindus. It is not Turkestan, that is of the Muslims. Then he says that in fact you can see their civilizational connect. You can in the description where he goes not just to the people in the recent past, but they know their history right up to the previous ages. He's talking about how the Kauravas and Pandavas and the Mahabharata happened in this region, how the Ramayana happened in this region. And then he comes down saying that over a period of time, people could not defend this land, and hence they lost large portions of it to others, to the Yavans. Then he specifically mentions Marji India as a person who has united a large part of this country, because Marji India at this point of time was living. So the first lesson is that they had this vision that of civilizational unity, like you had mentioned earlier, and they were trying to create a political unity based on this civilizational unity. That if our civilization unity is saying that the border of India is at the Indus, then we are supposed to politically make it so. That is one way we can look at it. Second lesson is that we can see is from Ahilyabai Holkar, how she went about building temples, gardens, rejuvenating this civilizational entity that was on an all India basis. You find most of the holy places that you go to, whether it be your 51 Tirtha Kshetras or any of these places, it will have the imprint of Ahilyabai Holkar. She did not limit herself to just the Maratha controlled territories. So this is one more.
11, 12, 13, 14. Okay.
I think somebody's mic is on. What? Can I continue?
Yes, Jeep, you can continue.
Yeah. So one thing is that they base their politics on this civilization identity, that we need to, not just free the this Deccan region from the Mughals, but actually go north and try and realize this past civilization greatness, which placed India's borders at the Sindhu River, and where all the holy places together were under the rule of Hindus. So this is what the individual. Even prior to this, we'll have Chhatrapati Rajaram talk about how he wanted to conquer Delhi, and Hyderabad and Bijapur, and bring all these under his rule. Okay. Even prior to that, we have a courtier and in the court of Aurangzeb who is speaking about Chhatrapati Shivaji, that Aurangzeb has put into that Mirza Raja Jai Singh and Aurangzeb had defeated this person who dreamt of capturing Agra and Delhi. So the whole mindset was definitely there. It is something you can take from the Maratha Empire in the modern Indian Republic, that this is what India's sovereignty and integrity meant to them, and which is what it should be the defining criteria for us in those terms as far as the territorial expanse of India is concerned. Second, we come to the administrative qualities. Again, a lot, in fact, some of the laws that were formulated in the 19th century were carried forward by the British rulers who came later on. Some of the land reforms that we attribute to the British as being carried out by the British government in the 19th century were actually continuations of the land laws that had been put in place by the Maratha rulers. So some of the elements of today's present law is in fact coming from the Maratha Empire itself. So that is one way. And we conclude by saying that I think Jadunath Sarkar has given the best example of summarizing this whole thing in his book on Chhatrapati Shivaji, is that the Marathas managed to show that it is possible for Indian powers to rule over such a large expanse of land. So that is one thing that we are trying to counter, that if not for the British, nobody would have been able to unite this country and not been able to administer it. But the Maratha Empire managed to do it. They were sending bureaucrats from one corner to another, the transferring officials, they were sending armies across the country, they were sending diplomats. In fact, they had diplomats in just about every court in the country. I think it is covered very nicely in that book by First Republic, as to how the diplomatic moves were being taken in northern India. For an example, I can tell you about a person called Naroshankar Motiwale. So this person was actually the Killedar at Jhansi. In fact, he was instrumental in building the Kille, the fort at Jhansi. He was administrator there. Then due to some reason, the Peshwa decided that he needed to be transferred, and he was shunted out from Jhansi and brought to Malegaon, where he built the current fort of Malegaon. So what I want to say is that the Marathas had that kind of influence where they could move officials over large distances from Jhansi to Malegaon, Malegaon to Jhansi. Then you had the same time that this transfer took place from Jhansi to Malegaon, you had one more person who then moved from what is today's Jalna region and took up residence at Jhansi. You had Maratha vakils and lawyers in Delhi who were keeping the Peshwa abreast of what's happening in Pune. You had somebody like Govindapan Bundela, who was permanently stationed in Bundelkhand, and he was keeping the Peshwa at Pune appraised of what's happening in that region of Bundelkhand. So under the Peshwas and even the early rulers, we had a comprehensive network of diplomats and subedars and everything spread over a large area, right from somewhere north of Delhi and towards the parts of southern India, and they were actually governed continuously for a quite substantial period of time, substantial enough to be able to take shocks and recover and again start functioning under Maharaj Shinde. So these are the kind of lessons we can take from the Maratha Empire.
Wonderful, Aneesh ji. Very insightful it was.
Thank you.
We have a number of debates around India being a civilizational state. This question is to Mr. MRVG. How do you think our historical political traditions can be incorporated into the current constitutional structure?
Okay, good evening to everyone. I think after a wonderful exposition by Venkatesh, Rangan and Aneesh ji, I think I'm in a minority. So I will have a special privilege of being in a minority of somebody who is not a scholar in Shivaji Maharaj or the Maratha Empire, like these two gentlemen have been. But I have been, because of my professional hazard of being a lawyer, I'm compelled to read the Constitution. And right now I'm penning a book, Discovery of Bharat, revisiting the Indian Constitution. And as I'm writing the exact portions, I am taken to a place called Uttaramerur, which is around 60 kilometers from Chennai. And Uttaramerur, 60 kilometers from Chennai, has inscriptions which detail the manner in which representational government was carried out some 1,300 years ago in this quaint part of Tamil Nadu. And I'm sure that Uttaramerur is not an exception. It is probably the rule in ancient India. So why do I say this? Because both Rangan and Aneesh ji alluded to the fact that every time we talk about democracy, the word demos comes from the Greek root of representing people. And that's how every law book and every law teacher teaches us that the word polis, P-O-L-I-S, is a representation of the ancient Greek city-state, and where laws were being written. Plato, Aristotle, everybody contemplated what type of government to be there. And democracy flourished or started there and then subsequently flourished. Then to some extent the Romans took over, and the Roman Empire, or you may call it Roman Empire, Roman state, or Roman whatever, civilization, whatever, comes into the modern form as the British Empire or the American state. So what we are seeing in the West, the Western civilization is basically has adopted, call what you may, the Greek and the Roman civilization. And whatever we are seeing today in the West is basically something would have its origin with the Greek and the Roman Empire. But when it came to writing the Constitution of India, we looked at the Greece, we looked at the Roman, we looked at the American, we looked at the French, we looked at the German, we looked at the Canadian, Ireland, we looked at everywhere. But we did not look inwards to see how a Maratha empire, just probably at that time, if 1774 is the date, probably it is 170 years prior to the independence. How did they declare this particular Republic Ganarajya? And how did they capture the essence of governance? We did not look into it. We did not either look into the antiquity of Indian civilization, which is embedded in Uttaramerur, or near contemporaneous civilizational state that we tried to usher in 1774. We also did not look into it. In fact, after I was invited for this particular program, I went to the soft copy of the Constitution Assembly debates. I tried to see if they had referred to Chanakya. Answer was negative. No reference to Chanakya. Then I asked myself, did they refer to Uttaramerur? They said no, no reference to Uttaramerur. Did they refer to Shivaji Maharaj? No reference to Shivaji Maharaj. Did they refer to Chandragupta Maurya? No reference to Chandragupta Maurya. Did they refer to Vikramaditya? No reference to Vikramaditya. Harshavardhan, Kanishka, nothing. In fact, the words Ramarajya, which was the words used by our freedom fighters in the run-up to the freedom movement, probably 45, 46, we were using the word Ramarajya. That was the words Gandhiji and others were repeatedly using. We will bring in Ramarajya. Strangely, does not even figure in the Constituent Assembly debates. Forget all these people. Ramarajya also does not figure. So what we had as a constitution is basically a complete set of people. No offense, men. They were great men. They were people of great standing, understanding of India. They gave their lives for the country. They went to prison. They at the prime of their life, they sacrificed everything. But the question is, did they write a constitution which is suitable or reflective of our civilizational genius? Now, what did they do? Look at the first few words of the preamble of the Constitution. We the people. We the people comes from America. It is reflected from the American Constitution. Then you had liberty, equality, and fraternity, which is coming from the French Constitution. So you took all this and rehashed and made a constitution without looking at what we should call as a civilizational state. Now, why we should call ourselves as a civilization state? Why? What it would have happened? Now, let me give you a classical example. Now, let us, for a thought, shall I say, provoke your thoughts, I'll make a counterfactual argument. Let us assume that Shivaji Maharaj civilizational document is adopted as the constitution in some way or the other. Probably it may not be fully conversant or fully in full satisfaction to the modern requirements, but let us assume we have filled the gaps and the core has been borrowed from the document of 1774. I ask a question to this audience. Would there have been a judgment of the Supreme Court like what happened in the Sabarimala case? This is what will tell you what is the difference between a civilization state and a secular state. A secular state believes there is nothing called a temple. And if there is a temple, it is basically a public property. And if it is a public property, we can go in. And if we go in, there will be Article 14, which is equality. If there is equality, then all gender, races, everything must be allowed to come in. And there is nothing called a temple with its own Agama Shastras or Tantrika Shastras that will prevail. Now, this is a very, I'm giving, because our time is limited, I'm only giving you an example. Why? What would have happened if there were a Shivaji Maharaj? Shivaji Maharaj would have said, nothing doing. This is a civilizational state that the Hindu sensibilities vis-a-vis Sabarimala is sacrosanct and paramount. And we will not allow the traditions of this temple, and this tradition of the temple needs to be protected. And that is how they would have ensured that the Sabarimala judgment would not have been imposed on the large majority of this country, and we would not have come out with something as stupid as what it was. The second one, recently, the Supreme Court has said, and it is there in, I think the Supreme Court has said that even in case of adultery, a woman did not have to be tethered to a single partner, and she can express with multiple partners, and there is no hard and fast rule that she should be loyal to her spouse. This is the words, or more or less, these are the words of the Supreme Court. Now, what is a Dharmic civilization state? Can you find an English word for dharma? You may say righteousness, rightful conduct, you may say an orderly conduct, all these things. We are a state, we are a civilization which is bound by dharma. Everybody is bound by dharma. In fact, in Ramarajya, there is a belief that Ramarajya extended for 10,000 years. And in this 10,000 years, Rama would have been there for 1%. 100 years maximum is rule. After which his establishment of Ramarajya went on for another 9,900 years. In these 9,900 years, there was no yerke sitram, there was no natural calamity. A parent did not carry the dead body of their children. That was the amount to which order was established. And everything fell perfectly. That is why we always say it is Ramarajya. Now, this Ramarajya is what Shivaji Maharaj, this is the Ramarajya that our freedom fighters were talking about. But when it came to writing the constitution, we began the biggest blunder by writing in English. We gave it to lawyers, and the lawyers were people who were basically studied in Britain and in other parts of Europe. They would not have known what, say something like Aneesh ji or Venkatesh Rangan has done, namely to study the Shivaji Maharaj documents or any other documents which throw something on how we civilizationally actually played this, created a public order. In fact, the first person, I think, if I'm correct, it was only Acharya Dharampal who found out and said that the Indian tradition or the Indic tradition of managing public order was one of the most well-documented one, But unfortunately, much of it was destroyed. Much of the evidences is not available. And he has chronicled in a book called Beautiful Tree, how India has managed its affairs. There are, of course, quite a few books that he has written. Acharya Dharmpal, between 80 and 2010, I think has done so much. 1980 and 2010 has phenomenal work in terms of these type of resurgences, in terms of chronicling how we managed our public order. The basic assumption in which the constitution was written was that we were barbarians and we could not, we were an underdeveloped religious community. We were underdeveloped in economy. We were underdeveloped in our political understanding. And we, at best, we were a warring set of people and one tribe on the other. And we did not have the wherewithal to take the modern thought process of Plato and Aristotle and others. And it was the West which had the greatest connect. And that is how our constitution was fundamentally written. So I think what you guys have done, both Mr. Rangan and Aneesh ji, has probably thrown the doors wide open yet again to revisit our own history. We need to go back and talk about this vociferously. We need to dig out more details. We need to chronicle more, shall I say, we should chronicle all the particulars and try to document this and translate it into every single Indian language as possible. It is no longer that it should be talked only in English. You should translate it probably into Tamil, into Kannada, into Gujarati, Bengali, and several other Indian languages. Once we do this, in fact, I always believe that Shivaji Maharaj has more connect with South India than even Maharashtra. That he has come up to Tanjavur, and every time I go to Kalikambal temple in Paris Corner, I see that every time there is an inscription written, and that's well placed, that Shivaji Maharaj came here on a particular day and prayed before goddess Kalikamba. So I think that there is a huge connect, and that is why even the great thespian was named Shivaji. And we from South must probably cherish these ideals. We need to build a mass campaign around the ideas that formed this particular republic in 1874. I would put up my hand and contribute Venkatesh Ranganji and Aneeshji to whatever extent, because my own book is going to deal with these subjects in greater detail. But starting point is somewhere down the line, the preamble of the constitution has to say that India is a civilizational state and a civilizational Dharmic state. Unless we emphatically say this and draw the inspirations and trace its genealogy to documents like this, several of them are available, we would be doing a great disservice to our generation and to succeeding generation. Because the way the country is going, another 30 years of this type of secularism is going to corrode and eat our vitals. So we have got the last 20 to 30 years available to fight this Azuric forces. So all of us need to come about, intellectuals need to come about. Of course, we need not be corrosive, we need not be abusive. We can always take the right steps with persuasive writing. And people like Venkatesh Rangan and Aneesh ji, best luck to you. And I wish that much of your work gets translated into Indian languages. And I also thank the organizers, because it is these type of functions that create the trigger for greater researches to be carried out in future. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, sir. Very, very absorbing and very interesting, sir. Holistic revolutionary nation building activities is what I could summarize the Marathas went about during their rule. Apart from the valor they exhibited in defeating the Mughals, what would be, this question is for all the three panelists, sir. What would be the one key lesson which we can draw from Maratha Empire and also the great empires that have been in India, which can be adopted for modern day Indian Republic? Venkatesh ji, Rangan ji.
Okay. Yeah. So I think that's a very good question. If I give one example, okay, I would say reviving our ancient knowledge institutions, and I'll give one example from the period of Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj. So you'll be very interested to know this, that now in ancient India, we had a great astronomer and mathematician called Aryabhatta. Now, all our Indians, we know about this, right? So the rotation of the earth, the decimal standardization of decimal numeration, the value of pi, let's say the Kal Kshetra or space-time kind of construct, etc. So there was Aryabhatta, and he established a school or an institution called Arya Paksha. Okay, it is something like you can say a university, and different schools or gurukuls and in different parts of India associated themselves with this Arya Paksha. So this went on for centuries. Now suddenly about the, let's say the medieval period, around let's say the 13th century onwards, we find, let's say, the medieval Islamic invasions coming, the Ghaznavis, the Ghurids, the Khiljis, the Mughals, and we find that this Arya Paksha was completely wiped out. Or with the exception of northern Kerala, a small bit in northern Kerala, we don't find a single manuscript of the Arya Bhattiya, okay, between maybe about 1200 CE or so, till about 1650, 1652. Now, interestingly, the first revival of this Aryabhatiya school in Maharashtra, okay, and in fact, which was also the first revival of the Aryabhatiya school outside Kerala in the medieval period, occurred in the Desh Mawal region in Maharashtra in 1574 Saka. Now, manuscript of this is there in a Bhagwat Singh Ji and Man Singh collection in the Rajabai campus. Okay. Now, very interesting date. This was precisely a date between 1647 to 1657, 1658, when Shivaji Maharaj was actually building the foundations of what his future state would look like. Okay, politically, administratively, building the navy, culturally, civilization. Importantly, we have to realize that why is it a long dead ancient Indian astronomical and mathematical institution could revive itself? Okay, in the colophon of his manuscript, he actually says, the writer praises Sri Vignaharta, saying that you have taken out all the Vignas and now there's hope. So why is it this hope could actually exist? It is because of a certain political will and a political determination being seen, so that people could realize that, yes, there is now merit in reviving our ancient traditions. So I feel in modern day India, many times, we pay lip service to this. So maybe a subject is introduced in Aryabhatta in a school, or maybe in a curriculum you have one subject, etc. We don't talk about institutions themselves. Yes, there is a modern context. We have to maybe dovetail the requirements to what the modern needs are. But at least making an attempt to establish these institutions, their modes of learning, how they looked at the world, I think would be very useful and was a very important part of the civilizations.
Wonderful, Ranganji. I think one of the key takeaways from your key lesson that you have given is Institute of Eminence for
based
reviving,
on our ancient
yes,
ancient civilization tradition. So
yes, sir,
I would
for
say that
preserving, protecting, and promoting our
so
heritage.
instead of just having IITs, IIMs, which is
Yes.
good, I'm not saying very good, but we need to have an institution based on our civilizational genius. So why don't we try that? I mean,
No, actually, now
I'm
I
not saying
think
copy it, but maybe build up on that core. If you can.
yes, I think there is this concept of under Atmanirbhar, there is this concept called one district, one product. Similarly, we can have one region, one institute of eminence for the heritage revival. Very worthwhile discussion, sir.
And linked to the modern market. So I'm not
Yes.
saying that these people should not, I mean, the way we look at this should not be just history. It is
No, fantastic, sir. Fantastic. This is a very wonderful takeaway. Aneesh ji, what is your that one key lesson that you want modern India to adopt or learn and move forward?
So I will come to that a bit later, but I would like to add to what Venkatesh was saying regarding reviving ancient institutes. Now, if you look at our neighboring country, China, so I think that is one country which is really trying to project itself according to what they perceive their own glorious past to be. How much of it is fact or all this, we don't know much about Chinese history, but they do try to project themselves as look at their own ancient past and then try to aspire to that greatness without looking anywhere else for inspiration. So there was this Chinese sailor called Zhang Yi. I think he's lived in the 10th or 11th century AD, I mean, even before that. So as far as Chinese history is concerned, this Chinese sailor, he went and he managed to sail to Indonesia, to Australia, to these shores. And Chinese doctrine is that we need to become like this Yangi, where Chinese ships are freely able to, dominate the world's oceans, like he did 800, 900 years ago. You can also talk about them in terms of, the Confucius Institute. There's something known as Confucius Institute, which is basically Chinese philosophy and thought being taught to students across the world. And that is Chinese soft power. Where they have the institute, they actually establish chairs in various universities. Anyone who wants to learn about Chinese thought can go join that institute and learn about it. So this is, I think, a very profound way of projecting soft power. Our soft power is what? Shah Rukh Khan, I don't know. So you can compare. I mean, they have one country where they have actually established proper research institutes and chairs for disseminating Chinese thought and philosophy. And our soft power is, people jumping around on a tree and beating up each other. I don't know how it compares. So that is what we can obviously learn from the neighboring country. You can definitely, I don't see why we cannot have similar chairs and institutes which take Indian philosophy and thought to the world. Say Chanakya's Arthashastra and these kind of things. Yes, there are Western authors who are discussing and studying Indian thought, but then again, we know what kind of books are being produced by them. I don't think we need to get into that discussion again, because it is not Indians putting forward Indian thought. It is basically Westerners trying to understand Indian thought in those cases. You can take any number of names who are doing this kind of studies. So that is what one can do, building on what he said earlier and what our neighboring country is doing, which we try to emulate, but then we end up projecting Bollywood instead of Chanakya. Coming to the Maratha Empire and even the empires before that, one thing we should learn is how they thought about India as civilizational state, and that is something we need to keep in mind always when we are talking about the political boundaries of India, of how we are going to perceive India. Is that India happens to be a civilizational state and not just a union of provinces as is being projected. You need to understand as to why Europe continues to be a bunch of nation states, 28, 29 states, and India continues to be a unified country at the same time, having the same amount of diversity. So there are some factors which India has, such as these, Tirtha Kshetras, holy places, and civilizational base, which connects all the parts of the country together. This kind of civilization base is absent in Europe. It did exist at one point of time when they had a Roman Empire. Now they do not. And although it looks like a language-defined division, it is not actually language-defined division. It is a religion-defined division in Europe, where you have their sphere of happens to be defined by a particular church. So we should guard against that kind of situation arising in India, where we lose track of our civilizational base that has created the country.
Wonderful, Aneesh ji. In fact, when you started, I just recollected a discussion I had with one of our senior friends on the Confucius chairs, which are present in the American universities, and how they influence narrative, set the agenda, and soft push on Chinese culture and take their agenda forward. So both of you have corroborated the need for an institute of eminence on Indian heritage, and also soft push in whichever way possible. Perhaps is a golden opportunity. The G20 leadership now with India, I think it's a golden opportunity for us to set the narrative in the right way and take it forward. MRVG, what is your that one lesson that you would like India to imbibe, sir?
Actually, I'm reading a book called Snake in the Ganges by Rajiv Malhotra ji. forget putting chairs in American university by Indian people. Actually, he's lamenting that Indians are funding chairs in Harvard and other Western universities to do researches against India. Today, our industrialists are precisely doing the opposite of what Venkatesh Rangan ji suggested and alluded to. Now, what Rangan said was very interesting, that probably every district, probably we have around 700 odd districts now, every district must figure out how it can have a civilizational connect. And when I say civilizational connect, it is not to the past. In India's case, civilization is never a past, it is a present. So you need to figure out what is it that this district connects India to the present. Now it is okay for the Prime Minister to go to the UN and say that Uttaramerur is the birthplace of democracy. That is okay. But why don't we also celebrate some day as Democracy Day in Uttaramerur? Bring say some foreigners to show. Of course, it's a very torturous place as far as to pass through. My native is very close by. So to pass through that village is a very horrible road, and its infrastructure is definitely behind the clock. But all this can be sorted out. It's not a big thing. The moment the government thinks, the moment the people think, the moment that we think that these are things that are representative of the Indian culture and Indian civilization, and we bring people to even the UN Secretary General, if it is brought and is shown that it is not Demos that was born in Police, but it was done in Uttaramerur, and how Shivaji Maharaj thought about it in the ancient treaties of 1874, or we don't have to look at Magna Carta, we don't have to look at Westphalia, we don't have to look at all those Western documents, and our courts don't have to start influencing or interpreting India and Hinduism with the Western lens. So the word denomination, for example, in Article 25 is basically something which I can't understand. How we can use the word denomination in Hindu? Is Shaivite a denomination of Hindu? Is Vaishnavite a denomination of Hindu? Is somebody else who follows a different mata or any tradition, is he a denominational Hindu, or is he the Hindu himself? The question is, in India, there is no denomination, unlike what it would be, say, in the various churches in the West. There is a Protestant church, there is a Seventh-day Adventist church, there is an Anabaptist church, there is a Catholic church, there are several churches. So you are, each one of you are denomination of the Christianity. Here we are the Hindu, and Hindu itself is it's a unitary one, expressing itself in several ways. So to call them denomination is doing violence to ourselves. So probably, as Venkatesh Rangan said, that we need to connect ourselves to the present through the past. And 700 district of civilizational excellence could be an idea that the culture ministry, in fact, I don't understand why we should have a cultural ministry. The culture ministry is technically, the word culture is what we are, civilization what we were under the Western idea. But in India's context, civilization and culture are one and the same. So when we are using the word culture, we have to not only look at archaeological survey and look at protecting some archaeological monuments and say that this is what has to be protected. We need to have a renaissance, and that renaissance should be that it must be multi-pronged. It can probably, one can lend, for example, if you are going to do something at Nalanda, you can create a world-class university there to create a study of Indic traditions, and create a world-class university which will house somewhere around 50,000-60,000 students. That grand scale that would rival the Harvard. It could be the Harvard of the East for the next 100 years. So that type of mega thought need to come to us. If you are going to have something in, say again, my favorite place, Uttaramerur, you are going to definitely look at a school on democracy, how various traditions of democracy has done it. Why don't you have a school there and bring about a law school that will look into all these things? So these are some of the places that we can definitely nurture, create. 700 places of civilizational excellence is what we must aim and ask our cultural ministry to look at. And that would give a great fillip to India as a civilization, because 700 places of studies means 700 into so many number of people working on this, brilliant minds, academic minds, who will throw up a lot of ideas about how India has to be curated for the next 100 years. I would stop here and again thank the organizers for giving me a wonderful opportunity, and also thank my co-panelists, both Venkatesh Ranganji and Aneesh for their excellent presentation. Thank you very much.
Phenomenal, sir. The 700 districts of civilizational excellence is a wonderful idea that I think it's probably the Saramsam, as we call it in Tamil. It's a wonderful takeaway for the evening. I think we should take it forward in whatever way possible. And Veranda Club would like to have your book launch in Uttarai Merur, sir. Your next book, Discovery of Bharat, Revisiting the Indian Constitution. We would like to have the program in Uttarai Merur itself. I've read a lot about it, not been to the temple, but we'll definitely do that, sir. Audience, the floor is open to you. You may interact with the speakers briefly. You have 5-7 minutes. Quick questions. Pradeep ji, I think you have raised your hand.
Yes. Namaste. My name is Pradeep Bharadwaj. I am the state convener for Prajna Pravaha for Karnataka. So now that we are talking about NEP, part of which is IKS, right, Indian Knowledge System and all, there is a structure which is already built. Now, how do we get these thoughts in the curriculum part of IKS and make it as a regular stuff where people study is what I think we should be also looking into. So is there anything that we can do about it, part of IKS? Just not Maratha, there are a lot of such things which can be brought in and made it as, I mean, in fact, we can make it as a part of elective or a selective subject as well. So if Venkateshji, if you can throw some light, what is that we can do about it and how can we go through that? That would be great.
I would rather prefer Venkatesh Rangan to answer this. It's an easy question, that's why.
So Pradeep, I firstly fully agree with you that we need to integrate this with the NEP basically. See, I just have one, I would say small, I would say divergence in my view. See, what happens when you introduce something as an elective, right? What I have seen is the significance of that reduces to a great extent. I'll give you an example. Let's assume you are having a lot of 10 subjects, and one subject is basically you have, let's say, Aryabhatta system, or maybe political traditions of the Chalukya Empire, or maybe political traditions of the Rashtrakuta Empire, whatever it is. This becomes a subject which you study, forget after you want out of the school, right? Rather, if we have an entire institution, okay, like I was talking about the Aryabhatta, right, which is founded on, let's say, in Indian principles, and you have electives based on that. Now, obviously, I do understand this is asking for too much. I mean, it may be not something we can set up overnight, but we can move towards that. That's what I feel. Yes, I mean, the current NEP structure, we have a very, I would say, good provision for the IKS, which we can start building on it. Maybe in electives, we can have maybe something like a combined subject on Indian political thought. Maybe let's say in the Ganrajya tradition, we can have something on Indian imperial thought. For example, I was just reading a book on the Chakravarti tradition of Indian empires, right from the ancient times, right from the times of Itihasa, the great imperial gurus, the Ikshwakus, etc. So this Chakravarti tradition was actually a basis for the unification of India. So can we study that? What are the political principles behind that? So I said maybe introducing electives would be a good short-term measure, but I think we should not lose out the larger picture where we need to actually, I would say, set up an entire system or an entire, I would say, institution based on Indian thought. I hope I have answered that. I mean,
Sure.
Wonderful.
Thank you. Very nice question.
Wonderful, ji. I think Aravind has a quick question. Aravind ji, you have to unmute.
Namaste, Venkatesh sir, MRV sir. My question is simple. So, despite the spurt in the rifts between the governors and CMs of various states that is now present, very palpable, and it is also coupled with innumerable hate speech against a certain sect of people. Why is the union government not taking stringent action against these governments, or are we misinformed by the so-called media? So, what's your take on that? I would be glad to hear.
Hate speech has to go through the courts. I'll answer the second question. hate speech has to go through the courts. And you must understand law and order is a state subject. And there is very little that the union government can do in terms of enforcing law and order, unless and until it becomes such a big issue that they have to use the NIA. The NIA is already overworked and overstretched, and they are looking into several aspects of national security. So to that extent, you will understand it is the state police which has to do it. And nothing prevents people like you and me to file a 156(3) petition with the court saying that here is a so-and-so who has indulged in this offense of hate speech. Here is the evidence. Kindly look into it and kindly do the needful. So this is how we need to take it up. It is more that it is not that that will culminate in some sort of a conviction to him overnight. It is something that will deter him. If you do for 10 people, another 10,000 people will think twice before uttering any hate speech on a particular community. So my suggestion would be that instead of waiting for central government to deliver, people like us have to go back to the police stations and give evidence and put pressure on the police. In fact, the police is also waiting. State governments are also waiting. They don't want to take a lead. It will be rather that they would like the long arm of law take its own process. Now, as far as the governors tiff with the CMs, it is not that it has happened only now. It is always, especially whenever DMK has been in power, they have been very uncomfortable with a governor who is not their handmaiden. They have always been uncomfortable with a governor who is independent or representative of the central government. Now, whether it is required, whether it is not required, whether it is something that has to be deleted from the constitution is something that is for pundits to debate. But today, as on date, we have all accepted the constitution, and we have also accepted the post of the governor in the constitution. So we must continue with the role of the governor, and he must be respected in the fullest. So there is no second opinion about it. Of course, we can always come back and say whether we require a governor's post in a state or not. That is entirely up to the people to debate and come to a different conclusion. Now, why is it happening now is something that you are probably slightly behind the curve. It is time immemorial since Nehru's days, wherever there has been a governor who has been acting independently or under the instructions of the central government, the state government have found it inconvenient. Now, this is something that you may call it as inconvenient. I call it as checks and balances in the constitution.
Wonderful,
Thank you,
sir.
sir. I had one more question. So you eloquently pointed about the preamble, the need for the preamble to be in line with the civilizational values, and Dharmic renaissance also needs to be incorporated into the thing. So in your opinion, how long will it take for us to establish this very fact if we are to find that this government continues, say, for another 10 years?
See, don't expect the government to put a team of people and write the constitution and say that India declares itself to be a Dharmic constitution. Now, let us take the Ayodhya movement. It was not sponsored by the government. It was not done by the people. Done by the government. It was done by the people. Whether December 6, 1992 and subsequent events and events before it, right from 1940s and even before that for 400 years. There was a benign fight for 400 years. Then it started escalating up to 83 or 84. 83 or 84, Vishwa Hindu Parishad took it. Then I think it was the Palampur resolution where the BJP adopted to take the Ram Janmabhoomi issue. Then it culminated in the demolition of the mosque. Then 22, we got 1920 or 1919, we got the 2019, we got the judgment in the favor of Ram Janmabhoomi. So it was not done by the government. It was done. Probably the last thing that the government did was Modi ji came and did the puja for the temple as a government. But it was a people's movement. People's movement transformed into a political movement. Political movement transformed into pressure on the government. Government put pressure on various organs. People's pressure also put pressure on the Supreme Court. And that is how you got the judgment. So we require a mass movement to rewrite the constitution, and that will take 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. We don't know. Probably I may not be alive. Probably my son may not be alive, but this war has to be done. This is a dharmic war. This war has to continue. It is not that we find it is not an instant noodle. 2 minutes noodle போடுற மாதிரிலாம் இல்ல இது. இது இன்னைக்கு விதை வைக்கிறோம், அது ஒரு நாளைக்கு பழம் கொடுக்கும். அது that is how we continue. We don't get associated with the fruits of our labor. We only get associated with the labor itself. That we are all competent and we need to do it, and we are doing it. That's all.
Wonderful, sir. Sarananji, you have any words to say? Anyone else in the audience? You have anything? Sarananji, anything?
No, we can conclude the session.
Okay. I think MRVG rightly has said, power is one thing. I think we'll have to build on influence also. Be the changers, all of you, Aneesh, Gokhale ji, Venkatesh, Rangan ji, MRVG, all of you, what you have pointed out to is, I think as a civilizational state, Dharmic civilization state, we'll have to move forward with the present values, connect with the present, not stay disconnected, and more importantly, Indianize Indians as much as possible. Thank you. Vande Mataram.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
The recordings will be available in a day or two. Yes, sir. On the 5th of February, we have a book launch with author Jijit Nadumuri Ravi on his latest book, Geography of Ramayana. 24th of February, we have Nilesh Neelkant Oak talking on the dating of the Mahabharata war. You can follow us on Twitter. We are there on Facebook, and you can check it out. Verandah Club is an online magazine. You can read theverandahclub.com. Thank you so much. Ji, good evening.